Democratic Women's Club of Nelson County, and tonight is a panel discussion on amendment number 2 that is going to be on the ballot, that is a constitutional amendment. I'm going to set the parameters for the meeting right up front. These are our 3 speakers. I will introduce them in a minute. They will each be giving you a different view of the amendment, and every one of them will have 10 or 15 minutes to speak. And after they've all spoken, and I would ask you to please be courteous, and then we will have a question and answer period, as long as it takes, okay? We're supposed to be done about 8 o'clock, but I will stay here till everybody's questions are answered, if these lovely ladies will. One thing that I did want to tell you right now, because I think this is interesting, because this country is extremely religious, India's top court has just granted all women the right to safe abortion. That doesn't mean that they don't have rules and regulations about the ramifications of that, but it does mean that constitutionally a woman has the right to control her own body. I'm now going to introduce our speakers as Cindy, is it Hine?
Like Heine, like coffee.
Like Heine, okay.
Like coffee.
Cindy is from the League of Women Voters, and she has left some material in the back for you, and after the meeting is over, you might want to get some of that. It's a very worthy organization. Cindy is a retired Associate Executive Director of the Pritchett Committee for Academic Excellence, which is a citizens group working to improve education in Kentucky. She was a volunteer member of the committee from 1983 until 1989, when she joined the staff, and she retired from that job in 2014. She received her bachelor's degree in nursing from the University of Michigan in 1969. She worked at the University of Kentucky Medical Center until 1989. She currently serves on the board of the League of Women Voters of Kentucky and serves as a liaison to the state legislature for the Kentucky League. She is involved in numerous community and church activities. She is a native of Michigan and has lived in Kentucky since 1970. She and her husband Richard reside in Lexington. They have 2 grown children who attended public schools in Lexington and 3 grandchildren. Tamara Wider is the Kentucky State Director for Planned Parenthood Alliance Advocates. She is serving in this role for 8 years. She is also the chair of Protect Kentucky Access, working to defeat the constitutional amendment banning abortion. Prior to joining Planned Parenthood, she worked at the ACLU of Kentucky. And then we have Diane Snowa, who was born and brought up in New York State and stayed there until she earned her bachelor's degree in English. She taught high school and community college until she felt a call to seminary. She was ordained as a minister in the United Church of Christ and has been a church pastor and a hospital chaplain serving in Missouri, Virginia, and Louisville. Her activism began in 1966 when she petitioned St. Louis County to designate parking spaces in front of the courthouse for persons with mobility issues. Welcome, ladies. I thank you very, very much for coming to speak to us. And we've decided that Cindy is going to lead the discussion.
Right. Thank you very much, Marcia. Is this working all right? I'm getting over a cold. I have a little bit of cough, so if I have to stop and hack a little, please pardon me. Thank you very much for the invitation to be here. I appreciate the opportunity. I am a member of the League. I need to also say when I worked in nursing, I worked in obstetrics. So that is a field that I have some familiarity with. The League of Women Voters is an organization that was created by suffragists in 1920 as the women in this country finally got the right to vote. And those women had worked hard and long to gain that right to vote and decided they wanted to become an entity that provided education and support to women as they now had a new role. They wanted them to be good, thoughtful, educated voters. So the League's emphasis is trying to engage people in the public and to provide information and education to folks. We are nonpartisan. We do not support parties or candidates. We do, however, support issues or oppose issues. And one of the issues that we oppose is Amendment number 2. And I'm going to make 2 points about that. The League is advocating for women's personal choice, our freedoms and our liberties. And we believe the government should not be making important personal decisions about an individual's reproductive health. And what I'd like to read is our national policy on this issue, and then I'll read our state policy because that kind of helps, I think, outline our concern about women's personal liberty. So our national position, the League of Women Voters of the United States, believes that public policy in a pluralistic society must affirm the constitutional right of privacy of the individual to make reproductive choices. Very simple, very clear. Women should have the right to make their own reproductive choices. And then the State League made this statement recently after the Dobbs decision. We call on our elected leaders at the state and federal levels to act swiftly to restore bodily autonomy to all people. Women hold the power to create a more perfect democracy. We will not stand by as constitutional rights are stripped away one by one. Women's rights are human rights, and we will continue to educate and advocate until reproductive freedom is restored in Kentucky. And then our statement, our actual statement on Amendment 2. An individual's right to personal reproductive autonomy is central to an individual's dignity and liberty to determine one's own life course. Liberty is defined as the state of being free within society from oppressive restrictions imposed by authority on one's way of life. We strongly oppose Amendment 2 to the Kentucky Constitution, which is on the ballot this November. Amendment 2, in combination with KRS 311.772, the trigger law, would deny the right to abortion in all cases, including rape and incest. Additionally, Amendment 2 and all anti-choice statutes interfere with the freedom and liberty of individuals and families to make critical and timely decisions with the best medical advice without government interference. Women's rights are human rights, and we will continue to educate and advocate until reproductive freedom is restored in Kentucky. So we believe that this is an individual liberty, individual women's rights issue. And we believe, and that's our position on, that's one of our positions. The second concern that we have is an issue around the balance of power, the checks and balances that are inherent in our Constitution. The amendment that is proposed, Amendment 2, would permanently change the Constitution. It would not change the current laws one iota. In other words, the laws that are currently on the books that prohibit abortion except for the life of the mother. And actually that language is, well, it's basically the life of the mother. It's kind of complicated phrasing, but that's basically it. But that would change the Constitution, not the laws. It would change the Constitution so that the Constitution would not provide any barrier to legal challenges to laws that the legislature might make. So what would happen is, if this amendment is approved, and if somebody challenges the laws that the legislature enacts, there would be nothing in the Constitution that they could use to counter those laws. That is a challenge to the balance of power. We have the executive and the legislative and the judicial branches of government for a reason, and that is to have a balance in terms of decisions that are made. If this amendment passes, the legislature has full authority to do anything they want, and there is no check anywhere on what they decide to do. So we believe that because it's permanent, because it's more difficult to change the Constitution than to change statutes, we believe that it's not a good idea. And changing the Constitution requires a 60% vote in the House and the Senate. The governor does not get a veto on constitutional amendments. And then if they get that vote, it goes to the people, to the voters, and the voters make that decision, only by a 50% vote, by the way. So this amendment, if enacted, would provide no grounds for any challenges to state law. And we think that that's a problem. That's a problem for our government. So I want to say a couple of things about what you can do as citizens, and then we'll go on to our other speakers. One is, if you are opposed to this amendment, we'd like you to sign the no pledge agreement, and I've got a form here that you can do. We obviously want you to register and vote. If you are registered, we encourage people to double check their registration to be sure that everything is still appropriate. You can do that very easily at govoteky.org or .com, and then be sure to vote. The ballot this year is very long. There are lots of judges, there are legislators, there are senators, there are local folks. One of the things we encourage is that you go to vote411.org, which is a place where legislators or candidates can fill in information about themselves. You can get more information about the amendments, both amendments. By the way, there are 2 amendments on the ballot this time. Most people don't know about either one of them, but they really don't know about Amendment 1. And I do have an information card about Amendment 1. We have not taken a position on this amendment, but we have provided some basic information. The language is very confusing, so we think this would be helpful. So these are on the back. Feel free to pick those up. And then we encourage you to be sure to show up and vote. There are 4 ways you can vote, and there are many days when you can vote. We can't all vote like we did under COVID with absentee ballots, the mail-in ballots. But there are days ahead of voting when you can vote of election day. And these cards have those dates for you, and there is an information sheet. We've been spending a lot of time this season helping people understand all the changes in the voting laws. That's another piece that the League of Women Voters is engaged in. So that information for you, and if I brought these, I know you probably did too, these are vote no information sheets. And then the other thing I have is Vote 411 is a great place to go to, you can actually register through this. You can find out who's on your ballot, and you get a lot of good information. I have stickers if anybody wants a sticker, and those 2 are in the back. And I think I will end there and turn it over to Tamara.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. This topic is extremely important because this is going to change our reproductive freedom for potentially generations to come. Amendment 2, the constitutional amendment was first passed from the legislature, like Cindy was talking about, in 2021. And so the last year, Protect Kentucky Access came into formation. It is a coalition that is comprised of organizations and people from across the Commonwealth. And when I say that in my tenure at Planned Parenthood, I have never seen more support and crossing over the aisle to come and work against this amendment passing. It's incredible to see how unifying this amendment has been to Kentuckians. And I know that I say that where abortion can be rife with stigma, it can be an area that is polarizing with you and your families. But when it comes to this amendment, which if it passes, there are no exemptions, and the laws that the legislature moves forward with, and we have seen them signal more hostile laws that go further into criminalization of abortion and further limitation of medical exemptions. Cindy started to talk about the life of the mother exemption, and I want to talk about that because the life of the mother exemption that already exists, that came out of the 20-week ban in 2017, is very limiting. It makes it so that two doctors who are not affiliated have to agree about a medically necessitated abortion. You also have to have the procedure done at a high-level neonatal intensive care unit. So when we look at that in the state, that is Louisville and Lexington. What if you're in a rural community and you can't get to Louisville or Lexington, or potentially another state, West Virginia, Illinois, depending what's closest to you, when you're having a medical emergency? And some things that we have already seen since Roe fell in June, and actually April, when we were the first state to lose access to abortion for a week in April after the legislature passed House Bill 3. People suffer. Those who are without means, those who cannot leave the state, are disproportionately impacted by these bans. And we know that states that ban abortion, states like Kentucky, will see a 21% increase in maternal mortality. We already have a maternal mortality average that is double the national average. And to see that increase by 21%, this is not something our families can afford. Not only that, but when we look at Black women in Kentucky, who are 3 to 4 times more likely to die in pregnancy, their maternal mortality raises by 33%. 33%. This is unacceptable. And you know, we all love and know someone who's had an abortion. We all know and love someone who's had pregnancy complications where they were forced to make decisions that none of us want to make for them. That is for the families in those moments. And what I have seen from Pikeville to Paducah, from down in Somerset back up into northern Kentucky, is that people are saying enough. Enough. Do not put a politician in my exam room. Do not mandate anything else that is going to cover my health decisions. When you look at the medical professionals in Frankfort, I can count them on my hand. When we talk about doctors, there are 3. These are not medical professionals making these decisions. And Representative Joe Fisher, who sponsored what is the Constitutional Amendment 2 now, when asked on the floor if he talked to any medical providers about this, he said no. He didn't talk to any medical providers. The American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists have come out against Amendment 2, and also the Kentucky chapter, who has been very vocal about the real implications that their practices are now facing, even for miscarriage care. Pharmacies are not filling misoprostol for those who are actively undergoing a miscarriage because there is a fear that they might be having an abortion. The liability on pharmacists, the fear and what we call the chilling effect, is already in effect in Kentucky. Doctors aren't able to make the decisions. It's lawyers and hospital administration that are coming into play and making decisions if their hospital can take on the liability for their providers. And you know, I did a conversation about this back in early July with Adia Wushner, who is the chair of the Yes for Life campaign, and she acknowledged and agreed that it will be lawyers and hospital administrators making decisions on very personal and potentially life-threatening needs. This adds time and delay to care. Now, no matter what side you are on abortion, I think that we can find room to talk about that these decisions need to be left up to providers. No exemptions for rape, incest, fetal anomaly, and very limited protections for life of the mother are unacceptable. And one thing that we see in Kentucky is, we have 120 counties in this Commonwealth. Over 73 of them do not have a practicing OBGYN. That's over 60%. That's over 60%. Our cervical mortality rate in Kentucky is 8th in the country. People are dying from very treatable diseases because they cannot get care or access to care. And so what is this going to do when doctors fear giving basic reproductive health care, basic obstetrical care, when their liability is high? They are fearful of being criminalized by the legislature who are not doctors. We're going to lose more providers in this community, and that we can't do that. And so when I say this is unifying, I am seeing people from all over the Commonwealth coming up and saying no. We are going to vote no on Amendment 2, and this is important for reproductive health care. This is important for the generations to come. We need to keep our freedoms as we move forward. And if you do not want an abortion, that is already your right. But don't take don't tie the hands of medical practitioners, and don't take liberties away from a generation who has only seen access, only been able to have, real conversations with their providers, and they don't have to code what they need. I do have a lot of opportunities for people to get involved with Protect Kentucky Access or Planned Parenthood. I'm very excited and motivated. The Protect Kentucky Access campaign, within about a week and a half of launching their field program, had over 3,000 people sign up to volunteer. Come and join us.
Thank you.
How's that? Can you hear me? I want to thank Martha and the Nelson County Democratic Women's Club for inviting me to this important discussion, which has put religion and politics on the same stage. In my childhood, religion and politics were forbidden topics. But times have changed, and particularly today, religion and politics are colliding. And I welcome the opportunity to discuss that. And I think you do too, because you're here. My role tonight, as I understand it, is to discuss the Bible, what the Bible has to say about social justice issues, what the Bible has to say about women's lives and clergy responsibility. When Tamara talked about the law criminalizing doctors, the law also criminalizes pastoral counseling. Yes. Whoa. So I want to give you a little background. My history indicates I was born in the southwestern part of New York State into a Lutheran family, strict German father and submissive Irish mother. Going to Sunday school and church each Sunday was as important as eating and sleeping. At college, there was no Lutheran church, so I drifted toward the Methodists. Why? Because they had a trumpeter that accompanied all those wonderful hymns, and I loved to sing. After college, isn't that a good reason to go to church? After college and a year of work, I moved to St. Louis, Missouri from New York to begin my teaching career. And one Sunday, needing church in my life again, I entered a Lutheran church only to learn that I could not fully participate in the worship service because I had not conferred with the minister. The guard, the sentry that stood at the door, the poor usher, I just looked at him, what was I, 23 years old, and I said, "That's not the Jesus I know." And I left, and that kind of ended it for church life for me. And then in a few years, I met the man who became my husband, and he was the baritone soloist in a downtown St. Louis Methodist church. So I drifted back toward Methodism and gradually into civil rights engagement, because that's what the progressive Methodists were doing in St. Louis. Fast forward 20 years, and I feel called to seminary. After serving as a student intern in the United Church of Christ during my final year, that church called me to become the permanent pastor, part-time pastor of their small church. And the local hospital called me to become the first non-Catholic chaplain in a traditional Catholic hospital. So I was ordained in the United Church of Christ in 1989, and since then I have come to learn that a progressive Protestant church is the best fit for me. And I have had an absolutely wonderful career serving the United Church of Christ, the Disciples of Christ, and the Lutheran Church ELCA. Religion is a word that encompasses both church practices and spiritual practices. And I want to make that decision because I think it's important today, in the days when the lines are becoming blurred. Church practice gives us something to believe in. The most common word is God. The church gives us something to believe in. It gives us a sense of structure, and it offers us a way to connect to like minds. Church gives us meaningful community. Spiritual practices, sometimes accompanying church practices, but not always, focus not on community, but on the individual's connection with what it is they believe. It might be spirit, it might be God, it might be the cosmos, it might be mystery, whatever they believe in. Our spirituality and our spiritual practices help us to connect that, while having a concentrated interest in our own spiritual growth. One spirituality enhances a sense of self and empowerment through the choices that have to be made as to what their behavior is going to look like. Our spirituality gives us a sense of belonging to the world and inspires appreciation and awareness of our interaction with that world, even with the cosmos. So religiosity, no matter what form it takes, whether it is church practices or otherwise, it has a huge impact on our understanding of self, on our vision of the world, and has a strong impact on the way we behave. I can illustrate using my closest neighbors. We were discussing women's rights, the history of male privilege, and the gains that women have made in the workplace. More equitable salaries, more CEO positions, more access to maternity and paternity leave, feeding stations now, etc. But also the massive distance that we still need to go in order to reach equality and equity for women. The subject of making choices came up when someone indicated that women can now become doctors, lawyers, engineers, plumbers, electricians. Vocations that were once limited are now choices. And from there, the conversation progressed to childcare, family planning, and a woman's right to respond to an unplanned for or unwanted pregnancy. Neighbor number 1 responded immediately that the choice is a very private one, needs to be protected. Sometimes that choice is easy and sometimes it's very difficult, and she gave examples from her own family. Neighbor number 2 responded that she could not agree at all. Quote unquote, "My church tells me how to believe and what to do, and I follow those teachings and they have worked for me." So we have both women brought up in the church, participating in the church, and so do you see the difference? One woman, number 2, is religious, a churchgoer, faithful to her church and its teachings. And the other woman is also religious, a churchgoer, but one whose spiritual growth has taken her beyond the dictates of her limited community. Religion has influenced both of their thinking and behavior, but they oppose one another on a given issue. I didn't particularly enjoy church or Sunday school. But as I grew into adulthood and faced the challenges of a larger world, I was influenced by those biblical stories and all those hymns. I had a sense of what was right and what was wrong, but I began to be challenged when choices that I had to make seemed to be in conflict with what I had been taught. Gradually, I became more and more interested in human rights, the diversity of the human family, in civil rights, and in women's rights. I was really surprised when I realized that Jesus had a real bias in favor of women. The woman with the flow of blood, the woman at the well, the bent-over woman whom he called to come and stand with him in the place in the temple where only rabbis and teachers were allowed to stand. And the woman who confronted him when he thought that he had come to serve only the Israelites. And she said, quote unquote, "Even the dogs," a word for non-Jews, "even the dogs eat the crumbs from beneath the master's table." Jesus frequently got very frustrated with his male followers, but he listened to his female followers, and he liberated them from whatever oppression they were experiencing. The uncleanliness that was attached to female bleeding, being born outside the Jewish religion, outside the Jewish territory, being silenced, or being positioned and assigned position in church or in society. So I believe that championing women's rights is a Jesus mandate. It is a Christian privilege. So, how do I answer those who want answers to questions about abortion? Isn't terminating a pregnancy murder? Is not murder a sin? And does not sin assign us to hell? So I need to go to the Bible. I searched the Bible. The New Testament says nothing about abortion. The word isn't there. the Jewish scripture, what we call the Old Testament, and which is the Torah upon which Jesus is acting because he was a very faithful Jew and frequently quotes the Torah, says nothing about abortion. Nothing, even though we know abortions were being performed in biblical times, before biblical times, and now, and will in the future. So does the Bible become useless in this discussion? No. Holy Scripture, in its very first book, Genesis, tells us that God has created the heavens and the earth and all that is within it, and that creation comes to life with the breath of God. Therefore, I interpret this, that the Bible tells us that the woman carrying a pregnancy and the embryo that is that pregnancy are God's creation. That embryo is a vital part of the woman's body, which is the vessel and caretaker of that embryo until it emerges or is taken from the mother's body and is able to take that first holy breath. This scenario is so important to Judaism and increasingly to Christianity that rabbis and some Christian clergy support abortion and sometimes recommend it. Family planning is a sacred pledge to God. Our families are tiny units of God's total human family. And when circumstances indicate that a child or an additional child is not in the best interest of that family, terminating that pregnancy is advisable. If we go one step further into the Abrahamic family, we look at the sacred book of our Muslim brothers and sisters. The Quran reveals God's mandate for equality so that in any Muslim society based on the Quran, if a man has a freedom, a woman must also have that freedom. Society's laws cannot impose an imbalance according to the sacred book called the Quran, even though some Islamic cultures, as we know, impose a patriarchal imbalance. If we look in the Far East, we see women veiled. We see women unable to hold office. We see women unable to do this, to do that. The women not able to drive. But if we look at more modern countries such as Turkey or Indonesia, the women are not veiled. They hold public office and they drive automobiles. Well, here in America, we have legislators today who do not know their sacred texts. They use them for their own purposes, and unfortunately, men and women believe them. So those of us who oppose those positions, and particularly those of us who look to Jesus as our model and use sacred texts as our inspiration, who see the Bible as a whole story of God's steadfast love, we have the responsibility to preach, to teach, and to live social justice. As a pastor, I can never tell a person how to behave or what to think. My role is to preach and teach the stories of God's history. As a pastoral counselor, I can never tell a person how to behave or what to believe. My responsibility is to listen and to help persons clarify the issues that are concerning them so that each one can make a personal decision. And in that way, I honor each person's autonomy, and I uphold the dignity of friend, parishioner, enemy, stranger, and neighbor. Thank you.
We'll open this to questions. I noticed that a lot of you took some notes. So if you have a question. Yes, me? Yes, sir.
What happened to the separation of church and state that used to be so strong? What happened to that?
Anybody want to take a stab? We have a political science over here that might want to answer.
I know, maybe, that's, a really interesting question, and one for with my generation, I'm 37, we really saw the rise of the moral majority in the 80s with Reagan. And you saw a concerted effort to really polarize people and issues to move forward a political platform. And the last 30, I was born in 84, so the last, almost 38 years now, you have seen that, the beginnings of the moral majority really take root and fly, and we've become more polarized. We used to have, Planned Parenthood is, bipartisan. We do not have, we would love to have Republicans with us. We used to have Republicans with us. I even remember back 7 years ago giving awards to some Republicans, and there was one in Kentucky in 2017 who voted no on these abortion bans moving forward. And so, but the strategy was effective, and it has proliferated, and we are now in a society that is so divided and looks for ways to take us down instead of find things that unite us and that we share. There are so many, parts of our lives that we can relate to others on. And, interestingly, even abortion. I think people forget or don't know that miscarriages are spontaneous abortion. Treatment for miscarriage is abortion care. If you have an ectopic pregnancy, care is an abortion. These words have been polarized, and even so much so to watch I don't know if you all watched back, a month or so ago when there was the 10-year-old rape victim in Ohio, and the doctor was attacked for providing care to a 10-year-old. In the conversation I had with Adia Wishner back early July, she questioned even if that individual was real, that 10-year-old. And if it doesn't fit a narrative, it gets taken down. And I just find that we have so much more in common, and we need to stop, creating a divide and labels. I don't like talking about pro-choice versus pro-life because I don't think that it's helpful in talking to people. We all have various ideas and beliefs that bring us to our ideas on abortion, but our lives are complicated, they're nuanced, and they are beautiful, and we can all find something to share with no matter where you are politically affiliated or your religious denomination. And I know this sounds crazy. I never thought, even a year ago, I'd be saying this, but this amendment has created room to bring people to the table again, because they're seeing how destructive and how extreme legislators have gone in Frankfurt, and they're not being private about their next steps. They've already talked about birth control. Nancy Tate, the sponsor of the omnibus bill that passed back in April, has said she wants to ban forms of birth control, specifically IUDs and Plan B. She doesn't want them distributed on campuses across the Commonwealth or in the mail. And we've seen, across the country and federally, more attacks on birth control, and that's what's going to happen if this amendment passes, because they can call it abortifactions. And so people are waking up and realizing that this extremism is enough. Like, we need to come together and find our humanity again. And I hope that's what we'll see in Kentucky.
If I could say something else, I think I have a big mouth. I don't think I need that. Can you hear me?
No, use the microphone.
Oh, I'm sorry. Also, all the talk about rape, and incest, which is very, very, very important. We never speak about the male. And what is the male's role in this? And what will be the male's punishment if a little 9-year-old is raped by her uncle or her father? When typically some of the religious right, that's a fact, they are very patriarchal. They don't want the women to have a choice. So what about these little children? I mean, at the Nelson County High School years ago, we had 40 females pregnant at one time. You know, these are not rich children. They're not from rich backgrounds. They can be very poor. So how do we help them? Or are we just perpetuating this cycle of poverty? And you know, those children know when they're not loved. A child knows, you can see it on their face. How do you help them?
That's a religious question. How do we care for those who are marginalized and hurt and abandoned by the laws that legislators make? And that's the role of the church. It's the role of individual believers. I believe that we each have a soul, and therefore our spiritual growth is very, very important, and it's very affected by the ways in which we do love one another. And how do we care? We have the A Fund in Kentucky. Are you aware of the A Fund? It is a wonderful collection of money, right? That makes certain that any woman in Kentucky who needs an abortion will not go without because of finances. It is money that is used for doctor bills, medical bills. It's money that is used for transportation. It's money that's even used for child care in some instances. And when Roe versus Wade was overturned, and when we knew our Kentucky clinic, our Louisville, Kentucky has one surgical clinic for two? Surgical? Oh, I didn't know that. Well, EMW is the one I'm familiar with. But anyhow, all of Kentucky has two surgical clinics, and they're both in Louisville. And so when people need to travel, I don't know where I was going now because I got distracted with the truth, but I love to be corrected. So that's wonderful. But anyhow, we do have the A Fund, which is true. Oh, and when it became apparent that the clinics had to close, then that fund grew exponentially. People just automatically knew that that's what was going to be the primary response, was get these women where they need to be. And the A Fund was the means for that.
So how do we get in touch with the A Fund if we need help for someone in this community? Do we call you, Tamara? I've got your phone number now.
So there are actually, yes you are, you got my cell number. So there are actually 3 abortion funds for the state. The A Fund is the longest running abortion fund. And then there's the Kentucky Health Justice Network that also does abortion funding, and they do practical support too, making sure that there is daycare, transportation, etc. Planned Parenthood also has the Justice Fund that goes for abortion care and now traveling navigation. You can call EMW, you can call Planned Parenthood, or you can look up A Fund online or Kentucky Health Justice Network, khjn.org. Of course, you can call me. I can definitely direct you. I also want to highlight that we're seeing across the country that these types of this type of support is being criminalized as well. They're looking to make sure that there is no support, there is no financial access to individuals, even if it's individual. And we saw that in Texas. We've seen it in legislation that is being drafted around the country, and was even on a Northern Kentucky Right to Life questionnaire. about abortion funds. So we need to take, real close watch on how far they're going to stop people's access. And it's not just to abortion, it's birth control, it's sex education. It is freedom of access to education.
Do you have a definition for reproductive justice in your head? The one I like best is that reproductive justice includes the right of a woman to have a child, the right of a woman to not have a child, and the right to raise a child in a healthy environment, which includes economics. So it's a broad issue that includes environmental concerns, economic concerns, geographic concerns, et cetera, et cetera. I also wanted to say that the question about religion and politics, there was an election, I think it was 1980, when the Republican Party was looking for the issue that would make them feel a bit better about their prospects of winning the next election. And that is when they actually named abortion as a platform issue. And I think that contributed a great deal to bring churches and religious ideas into politics. Because that's when the discussions began. What is abortion? What are the rights of the unborn? What are the rights of the born? And so on and so forth. And all of that has led us into deeper and deeper investigations as to, the time for fertilization, or the time of human life after fertilization. And so, and there is no time. You all know that, do you not? The scientists tell us there is no time that you can pinpoint human life. And every church has made its own statement. I brought the newest. If you want to know what your denomination has to say, I can give you a 1 or 2 sentence idea. But from that time on, I was Republican until Richard Nixon. And I could not vote for him the second term. And then I was independent, and just gradually, I still would love to say I'm independent, but the Republican Party has left me. Anyhow, question?
Yes. Can you hear me? Mm-hmm. The three of you have painted a rather dystopian future for women in this country. Where do you think the end game is going to end?
Well, I don't think we have an answer for that, but I do think if we look at Kansas, there is hope. In Kansas is just as conservative and red as Kentucky. But on this particular issue of women's freedom and women's liberty, folks came out, they registered and came out and defeated the amendment in Kansas. I think it was 60 to 40%.
18 points.
It was by 18 points. So I think when the bottom line is, when these kinds of issues arise, people stand up and women will stand up, and I think you'll find a lot of women standing up now saying enough is enough, we're not going to tolerate. So I think there is hope.
And I'll say, I started my tenure here at Planned Parenthood in 2015, started early in 2015. And, or I'm sorry, 2014, going right into 2015. But, it was right when Bevin was coming into power. We didn't expect it. And it was 2016 when we started to see the onslaught of the anti-abortion bills pass. It was 2016 when the House flipped in Kentucky. And I feel like I have just been fighting and fighting and fighting. And sometimes it feels like we're fighting alone. People don't come to Frankfurt. They don't show up. We can't get volunteers. And since Roe fell, people have realized that their rights are on the line, you know, we had a believability gap. People didn't believe that Roe was going away. We were doing calls, we were doing things for about a year. We were pretty sure Roe was gonna fall, and people didn't believe us. But once Roe fell, people realized everything was on the line because of the privacy considerations that Roe upheld and created on other, you know, precedents. And I'm excited about Kansas, but I have to tell you, even before Kansas, I was feeling good about Kentucky, because one thing Protect Kentucky Access has done is we have spent a lot of time and money and effort into doing research in Kentucky on abortion. And as much as people like to say Kentucky's a pro-life state, there actually hasn't been the research done. There's legislators, of course, in Frankfurt, and they take, you know, they use that as, you know, well, this legislator's pro-life, so we have a mandate. But people don't always pay attention to each and every issue. And as we've done our research, we have found that people, you know, are more nuanced, like the rest of the population. Back in 2019, actually 65% of Kentuckians said they didn't want abortion banned, and that number has continued to increase. We had a poll that was released just this summer that 79% of Kentuckians did not want to see abortion banned, and 62% back before Roe fell were against the amendment. So I was already feeling good by the data and the research that was coming in, and only more invigorated by what happened in Kansas and the fact that we were able to snag Kansas's campaign director for Protect Kentucky Access. So we have Rachel Sweet now working with us too in Kentucky, and you know, there's a lot of attention on our state, but one thing I think is true, that is true nationally, people want access to healthcare. It's popular, and it's something we can all agree on, and we're going to have an opportunity to change the narrative on Kentucky and show that red states, you know, that's just a misnomer. It's that we're not invested in. People don't look at us as a potential for progressive and compassionate policies because of some of our leaders who are elected from here with very low voting turnouts, might I add. So we have a lot of hope to look forward to, and I know that this, and as crazy as it sounds, it has renewed me because of the outpouring of support from every single county in our Commonwealth. Every single county is represented in our coalition's pledge to vote no.
My response to the question about being draconian, I have a vision of the women really feeling empowered in this state and really coming to understand that they have a voice. You and I both come out of a history of being silenced, being subjugated. I could not get a credit card after I lost my husband and became a single woman with a child who owned property. And I could not get a penny's credit card or any other credit card in 1966.
Right.
So we've all come out of a history, and we all have a little bit of that in us, that we're not quite as good. We don't deserve quite as much as our brothers. We're conditioned, we've been conditioned. And that we have to be intentional about debriding and getting it out of our system so that we know that we are precious, wise, intelligent, and worthy human beings, and that no one has the right to take a right away, specifically a right to decide whether or not we're going to expand our families. We must make our voices heard.
Susan?
I don't know about everybody else, but I feel as if I'm well and truly deprived based on what's happening around this issue right now. I mean, it's infuriating. I find it infuriating. And I know where they want to go. I mean, you have to look at other parts of the world, and you can see where they would like to go with us in veils and totally not able to drive, not able to do work. So I think I've been, just based on what's happening in America, in Kentucky, with women being disempowered, has done a pretty good job of debriding. And it feels good.
And it feels good. I do want to remind you that what happens in America with American policy, especially in relationship to women, informs every power outside of America. So that when a country realizes that America can restrict women's rights, that gives some countries more energy toward genital mutilation, sterilization, and those anti-woman practices that are practiced in other countries. So this election is not just about America at all. Not at all. If we care about the women and children of this world, we have to defeat this amendment.
And I'd also like to add that we're seeing across the country, across the globe, that countries who have had criminalization on abortion, in effect, are being torn down. We saw in Ireland, what was it, 3-4 years ago, where people were flying home to vote no, to repeal their criminalization of abortion because they saw how much it affected every person in their life. And it's not just women affected, everybody's affected by abortion limitations, because it hurts families when they can't work together to make decisions, and they lose people. People are lost because of illegal abortions, because of not accessing abortion. And so we have to keep healthcare safe and accessible for people across the world. And Ireland fought back, Chile, Argentina, Mexico. We heard India today. We're seeing countries fight back on their repressive policies on reproductive health care because it is a losing end game.
Yes, ma'am.
We seem to have a lot of craziness coming from different legislators who think they know what is right. A 16-year-old in foster care who's pregnant was denied an abortion because she wasn't old enough to make that decision. But yet, she's going to raise a child. That's just crazy to me.
Plus, she was also emancipated. She was an emancipated 16-year-old who that girl was an emancipated 16-year-old who did not have a guardian. And she had to go to court to get permission to have the abortion. And the judge said, well, you're emancipated, so you can make life decisions. However, you're not old enough to decide what to do with your body. And that, give me that damn mic. That really is the issue here. We have one young lady here that's under the age of 21, I'm sure. But the issue is, if you do not vote no on this amendment, no matter what your religious position is on abortion, you are going to deny women equal rights under the Constitution of Kentucky. And where are they going to go next? Title IX? Do you play sports? Okay. You don't understand what it was like to be in high school in 1965 and have the basketball team be told, you can't participate because we're not paying for girls' sports. We're not paying for girls' equal education. I went in the service in 1973 in the Coast Guard. I could be two things, a secretary or a bookkeeper. None of the other fields were open until 1977. So you young people have had the privilege of some of the things that we fought for, and now we're asking you to help keep the privileges, because if you don't, they're going to go away. Talk to your grandmother about things like that.
Don't know.
Don't talk to me. I mean, when I was growing up, a boy was of legal age at 18 in the state I grew up in, but a girl was not of legal age until she was 21. And I grew up in Maine, which is just as rural, and in a lot of ways, even, you know, more Republican, more stodgy than Kentucky. So we just have to remember that we are also preserving the future that we have built for our children. And if we don't vote against this amendment, this will not be the last thing they will take away from us.
And I think it's so important, you know, for those that, you know, are on the line with abortion, doctors are already sending their complicated pregnancy cases to Illinois because they can't do what they need to do. And this isn't even abortion care, it's just making sure that their patients are safe and have a plan B if something happens. This is not hyperbole, this is what's happening in Kentucky because the laws have made providers so unsure on where that line is. That for the safety of their patients, they're getting them doctors set up in Illinois. Why is it that people in Kentucky will have less health care than people in Illinois? And then we look across, you know, our surrounding states, the same for Indiana, Ohio, West Virginia, Tennessee, Missouri. You know, 33 million people are going to have, are not going to have the same reproductive health care that the rest of the country does. What does that mean for us moving forward? And as we talk about Amendment 2, it's really, really, and especially to that story, I didn't know that story about the 16-year-old in the judicial bypass, but that makes it even more important to be focusing on the judges. You need to be researching the judges. You know, a lot of, you know, judicial candidates don't go in for endorsements from organizations like myself or, you know, considering like the polarizing crew, but Right to Life has some judicial candidates, and I recommend you go look at them.
What was that last one?
Right to Life has endorsed many judicial candidates, and, you know, doing your education for November 8th, I find that a handy tool.
I've read that there were 2 9-year-olds in Kentucky. Have you?
Yeah, there have actually been, every year we have children, I can't remember the exact numbers off the top of my head, but there were, I believe, 2 children not at the ages of 9. I think there were 10 under 15, and then, you know, I think more around the 16-year age. But like, let's talk about when you're a 9-year-old, you know, and we're seeing.
The car.
Yeah.
They have to have car seats to be in the back, you know, but yeah, you can have a baby.
Yeah, and we're seeing children get their, you know, periods younger and younger these days. You know, 8 and 9-year-olds, it's not uncommon for them to have a period. And when you see them, you know, coming into the clinic to seek help, sometimes, you know, it's you know, it's a family member, it's a person at school, like it's people that you know. And how I can't imagine the situation for that poor mother in Ohio, you know, and then to be vilified while trying to help her child. We see that in Kentucky already, and we cannot vilify the providers because we're scaring them away.
Before we leave, I want to ask you if you belong to any clubs or organizations beyond the Democratic Women's Club that you might have the opportunity to organize into a reproductive justice team. I did it at our church last January, where I met Tamara. She was one of the presenters from Planned Parenthood, but she also enabled their education director to bring 2 teen educators to a 4-week program that I designed. It had to be on Zoom, it couldn't be at the church because of COVID. But 1 week was the denomination executives that came and talked about our stance on abortion and reproductive justice. And week 2 was Planned Parenthood, week 3 was ACLU, and week 4 was religious leadership. We had 4 or 5 religious leaders, including Jewish as well as Catholic and Protestant. for a panel discussion at the end, and from that has grown a tremendous team that is constantly working on issues. Churches, I don't believe churches should ever dictate a candidate. You know, that Ann is better than Susan. But we can discuss issues and present issues, and it's our responsibility to do that.
Are there any other questions where?
I'd like to just add
During the-
another
Please
comment
do.
and echo what Tamara said about elections. The amendment is one issue. We hope and believe that it will fail, and that's going to be important. But it's also important to consider the books already on the law that consider pregnancy from the time an egg is fertilized by sperm is pregnancy. And there are penalties up to $5 million for pharmacies if they don't abide by the laws about the drugs that can be used for abortion. Doctors can be fined up to $1 million. They can be threatened with felony convictions if they don't abide by these laws. There are incredible reporting requirements for every single abortion. If they don't abide by those, they can be fined. The law that passed in April is really draconian. So what we have to remember is we need to pay attention to the judges who are in our current elections as well as our legislators. We need to be sure that we elect people who are not wanting to punish women, who are willing to support women's choice, and if we're ever going to change things, because the books that are on the law aren't going to change if Amendment 2 fails. They will continue to be on the law. They can be challenged, and that's a good thing, but they need to be changed if we want to have safe access. I am going to go ahead and pass around these petitions. We'd like people to pledge to vote no. That's going to give us a sense of, what the tenor is out there. And if you are interested in getting engaged, you can check that also and provide contact information. But I'm going to go ahead and pass this around now. One other thing that I want to mention, because I think we haven't touched on the issues that arise or the questions that arise if abortion is completely eliminated, which basically it is now. What's going to happen with women in the workforce? Are they going to have to stay home to care for children? Who is going to provide child care for these children? What is the enrollment in our medical schools going to be like? Will folks from out of state come to our medical schools if they can't learn and provide appropriate gynecological care? Will out of state students come to Kentucky if they realize that this is a place where if they should become pregnant, should be raped and become pregnant, they can't get care? What about the number of companies that come to Kentucky? Will companies say, I'm not interested in that state or those states? The other thing that I think we forget about is people who are in fertility cases, infertility patients. I have a friend who has eggs frozen because she had to undergo chemotherapy. What happens with that? Because the process isn't just put one egg in the womb and hope it takes. They put multiple eggs in. Would she have to have quadruplets if in fact she became pregnant and 4 eggs implanted and grew? So that's a huge question, a huge concern of young women. So there are just a lot of questions around what is going to happen if in fact we continue the current law that we have that provides no access or no abortion for anyone except the life of the mother. So I'm going to pass these around. I hope you'll please sign them and turn them in at the end.
And yes, ma'am.
So my question is,
Please.
how do we empower the next voting group? How do we engage them in this conversation? you know, I don't know if you guys are aware, but if you have these conversations in schools, it's kind of frowned upon.
Right.
And we get beat up as board members about allowing it to happen. I'm here because I want them to have these rights that you ladies all fought for. But how do we make sure they're at the table and that they're educated in what these amendments mean to them and their generation?
I can tell you right now that the Democratic Women's Club will come and speak to any group of kids that you can get together in any location, because we can't get them to come to a meeting with a bunch of white-haired old ladies.
We printed those cards thinking we're gonna go drinking and handing them out.
I think with a
You go to the
QR
bar.
code on it. If you looked at the video yet, okay, well, I thought maybe you'd look at it silently. But that's why we put the QR code on that card, because we can't convince your friends to come and listen. They think you want to change the law. That is absolutely necessary. If this amendment passes, we will have no legal standing to change the law. That is the biggest problem. We can't get those laws off the books because we're not going to have a legal challenge to be able to do it. So if you can get them, we'll come talk to them. I will pledge that from this group.
I'm also going to throw it back on us. So looking around the room and here at the table, we don't have them reflected in these conversations, and so at times it can be intimidating and scary, and especially if you don't see yourself reflected in the community or in the policies. We have to create spaces for all ages to be in leadership positions too, and I've seen it all across Kentucky where there isn't that room. But we also know something that all of you sitting in this room need to know, like 86% of Kentuckians support comprehensive sex education. It's popular. And when we have discussions in in board meetings, it's the community that needs to turn out and support those, because they are the majority. 86% of Kentuckians support comprehensive sex education. And when I look, you know, I don't know all the different high school programs, but there are a lot of opportunities, I think, for people to plug into Planned Parenthood. We have we have a teen council, but I think it's the communities too that need to start giving them the leadership roles and creating a space that's safe for them to impact the future of like organizations like this.
I think as parents, there's no group that likes to come together as much as adolescents. So supply the pizza, supply the Coke, the 7-Up, the ginger ale, whatever. And have pizza parties with adolescents in your neighborhood, in your church, in wherever you operate. Have a pizza party. And bring up the subject of sex education or abortion. You know, what do you kids know? What do you don't know? What are your questions? What questions do you have of your mother and your grandmother? I got my period in the middle of math class and I didn't know what it was. The boy that sat behind me told me I was bleeding. Now that probably wouldn't happen today. Kids are a lot more aware, but I'm 87, so the people were not, it's a whole nother generation far removed. But get a group of adolescents together and just ask them what they know, what they don't know. Talk to them about voting. They're not old enough to vote yet, but they're old enough to learn what voting, how important voting is, and how do you research candidates? How do you know what that judge stands for and how that judge might rule if you get caught with an ounce of marijuana in your car?
I'm going to give you just a minute, and then we're going to have to stop unless somebody has a pressing question, because I promised that we would be done about 8 o'clock. But Cindy, you've got the floor, and then Hank needs to speak before we leave.
Okay, I just want to remind you that young people can vote as long as they are 18 by Election Day, November 8. So if you have a 17-year-old friend or friends or daughter or granddaughters, and they will be 18 by November 8th, get them registered so that they can vote. Because if young people don't turn out like we old folks. And if they did, they would change the world. And I think it's really important that we begin reaching out. I want to thank you all for being here. I really appreciate the comments that you've shared. Plenty of information, stickers, Vote 411 is a good way to find out a little bit about the judges. We hope, because we ask them to fill out the voter guide, doesn't mean they do it, but it gives you a sense of who they are if they did. And what's the name of the legal group that everybody belongs to?
The ACLU?
No, the conservative. Federal Society.
Oh, the Federal
Oh, the
Society.
Federalist Society is a legal organization of very conservative folks, and they aren't appointed by Republicans unless they're a member of the Federalist Society. So if they say they're a Federalist Society member proudly, that might be a hint about whether you want to support them or not.
And I know we're going to turn over the floor, but I just want one more thing to the youth question. You don't have to be 18 to register people to vote. You don't have to be 18 to knock doors and make phone calls as long as your parent is fine with it. You can impact the election. And there are lots of groups hoping to have you put in leadership roles.
That is correct. Hank, I'm going to let you speak for a minute. Yeah.
Hi, everybody. My name is Hank Linderman. I'm the Democratic nominee for Congress in the 2nd. That used to be all of Nelson County. Now I think it's about half of Nelson County. I'm pro-choice. My opponent is Brett Guthrie. I think he had on his website that he believed that life begins when you think about conception. So he's...
I would have had 25 kids.
Exactly. I wanted to point out a couple of things. First of all, there's a lawsuit from 1978, which, and of course I took my glasses off, but the idea of the lawsuit was someone who needed a bone marrow transplant and sued a friend who was a match. These were 2 men, and by the time it got into court, even though it was going to cost one gentleman his life, the other person could not be forced to donate bone marrow. And the judge said, there's no limit to this. If we start to force people to give blood or force people to give bone marrow. And this is an argument that doesn't have anything to do with male or female. This is something, if you've got some male friends who have trouble understanding and accepting some of this, well, would it be okay if the state forced you to give up a kidney? Would it be okay if you were forced to give blood? So part of this, a big part of this that I think men could understand a little bit more easily is just simply body autonomy. And I just wanted you all to be aware of that. The next thing is, in the discussion of division, yes, we are very divided in this country. And it keeps getting worse. Division allows corruption. We have corruption in our political and in our economic system. And that corruption creates inequality. That's social and economic inequality. And that inequality then creates more division. Now those 3, these are a vicious cycle. But of the 3, the soft spot is division. I don't think the other 2 are fixable right away. But division is also interesting because I don't believe it can be fixed from the top. It can be fixed by those of us here. Every one of us every day can fix the division in our lives. I talk to Republicans endlessly. I don't know, and by the way, I tell them I'm a damn Democrat. And they usually laugh. And only a few walk away. I also occasionally talk to couples, and a husband will say, well, abortion is murder, and that's all, and he'll walk away, and the wife says, I got this. There's a lot of division. There really is a lot of division out there. My slight concern is it's not going to be enough to defeat this. This will not be the end. If we're able to defeat this amendment, that will not be sufficient. Okay, and I hope you all understand that. We're going to have to get rid of legislators who think it's okay to pass these sorts of things. So, I also want you to understand, this job will not be easy. It will not end this November. It will be going on. Thank you all. Thanks, Martha.
Thank you. I want to thank our three panelists. I really appreciate you being with.
I turned it off. I'm sorry.
I want to thank our three panelists for taking the time to come down here. I know it's a small group, but you really have made an impact, and we can't thank you enough for all the effort that you've put into this. Thanks again. Okay?
Thank you. I forgot to say there are yard signs if anybody wants them.
We've got two people, Mark, we have two people with video, and where will we be able to see this?
Okay. This is the Nelson County Gazette.
Online.
That has done a video. You'll be able to go on the Nelson County Gazette and watch it. This is PLG, it is Facebook Live, and it is also going to be in their library. And then Hank has videoed this for us.
Just audio.
The audio, and when he gives it to us, we will post the audio. But they actually have our smiling faces along with the audio, okay? And there are cards in the back, postcards in the back that say vote no. They have a QR code on them. If you'll take them, take some to your friends. The QR code will lead you to a video that the Democratic Women's Club has produced about why we should vote no and not have mandates on our bodies and our medical care. So feel free to take those. The league has put some paperwork in the back for us. Tamara has paperwork, and if you'd like to sign, please take it for your yard. Okay? Thank you, and hope to see you all again at another rally for amendment number 2.
Is this your pen?